Well, two big issues we're looking at today, and of course, depression is real, as many have come to realize, and has led to the loss of many lives. It is also one of the most understated medical challenges on the continent. Depression is the most prevalent mental illness in the world. About 10% of Africans are reported to have clinical depression, and 66% of them are women. The World Bank refers to depression as the greatest thief of a productive economic life. Now, depression is a silent epidemic, and in the absence of enough mental health centers to cater to people challenged by this problem, there are many Africans currently living with various mental health conditions. Across the streets of Africa lie people who urgently need mental health attention, but are not getting it. Many African governments are yet to fully understand the impact of these important parts of human life on their citizens. Depression is believed to be one of the leading causes of disability, and as awareness grows of this problem, there is an important need to fix the loopholes. It is one of the key things we'll be looking at today, as the world is also still marking the World Day. And of course, another beautiful day we'll be looking at is something that has to do with the girl child. Excuse me. The girl child is often remembered in a day like this, but here we're trying to see how we can drive it. It's the 10th anniversary of the International Day for the Girl Child. While there is a sense of there's a sense of fulfillment in the awareness of the rights of the girl child, there are still issues limiting the progress and growth of the girl child. In Africa today, the girl child has proven good enough for any responsibility, especially in the areas of leadership and society building. On December 19, 2011, the UN declared October 11 as a day for the girl child globally to measure the progress of the opportunities given to the girl child amid many other issues. Welcome to the Square. I'm Sulaiman. Well, a whole lot. Child slavery, prostitution, forced labor are some of the limitations experienced by the girl child on the continent. And while there's been growth in Africa, there's still far from expectations. Today, I have with me someone who's been an advocate and also a community leader. And today, someone also who's vying to represent her people. Tari Taylaur, she's the State House of Assembly candidate for the Youth Party in Eti-Osa 1, Lagos, in southwest of Nigeria. Good to see you, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Quite an apt one, and it's good to have a lady with us today that we're talking about a girl child.
Yeah.
I know today we're not talking about your aspiration, but let's start by talking about how it's going for you.
It's exciting. I mean, it's such a learning journey, for me, politics and, this governance space. Every day, I make myself a student of Nigeria, because if you want to serve a constituency or serve a people, you must know all of their needs, you must know their challenges, you must know what agencies and institutions of government exist to serve them and understand the way that they work, so that by the grace of God, when I do represent them at the State House of Assembly, I would have enough knowledge of the challenges and enough solutions to fix and implement, and also provide that oversight function, which is what, as a legislator, primarily we will be doing. So I'm just preparing myself,
Well, we know that without the knowledge, you really can't actually face the challenge, the challenges ahead. But again, many watching, especially young girls, will be so inspired to see you, because I recall growing up, I was also inspired watching, older men talk, and I just felt I wanted to be like them, or even better. So perhaps let's start by looking at what it means to be a girl child on our continent.
Wow. I believe that the experience is different for a lot of different people. I would say that I have experienced, you know, I wouldn't say privilege, but I have had a comfortable life. I have been exposed to the right opportunities. I went to good schools. I have been educated. My parents were able to afford to give me an education. I have not been abused. You know, I haven't been violated in any way, my dignity as a girl. You know, so I guess that has served me a bit of confidence to be able to step out and say, I want to lead, I want to make decisions, I want to represent a community. If I had been violated or broken in any way by my community, I wouldn't have the capacity to be here now. So what are those tools? Education, you know, confidence, empowerment, the ability to step out and make a difference. But sadly, we know that that is not the reality in many cases, especially in our rural areas. And in the urban areas, the access to opportunities for even quality primary education is not there. So we have 20 million children out of school across the nation, probably up to 2 million in Lagos. What are they doing? Sometimes it breaks my heart when you just see little girls and boys milling the streets. No one is engaging them. And these are children of obviously school age, adolescents, toddlers, you know, people who should be learning. And they are being taught by the streets, basically. They're out there fending for themselves. The first education they are being offered is how to go and beg and bring the money back to their parents. That is a tragedy. At a time when, from the age of 3, 4, kids are being taught how to code and program and, you know, all sorts of technological advancement in education, our children here are wasting away. I mean, a large majority of them who are not in school are wasting away, not having the opportunity to improve and contribute and develop that agency that it requires to lead and contribute actively to your community. So we definitely need to do better in that area.
Not that we need to do better. And you speak of confidence, which is very key here, and talking about education. My own daughter, actually, if not for education and the confidence, perhaps I wouldn't have been able to perfect the pronunciation of veterinarian.
She gave you a lesson on that.
No, because she said she wants to be a veterinarian. So I had to learn how, because I usually start on the word. So now let's talk about, you know, helping these ones you've so identified, because when we drive across many cities on the continent, Lagos, that should be a smart city, we still see these young children, girls especially, even in the night.
Yes, yes. You know, it's funny where my constituency, which is primarily Lekki and, you know, Eti-Osa one, I recognize some of them. And there's one particular one, you know, for a number of years, I've seen her grow on the street. You know, I think she and her parents fell.
She's always been out there.
She's always, like, for the last 3 to 4 years, I have seen her, like, physically grow, do you understand, on the streets. She's with her mother, they are homeless. And I think her mother has a bit of mental health, which is something that you're also discussing today. So basically, for a number of years, they have just lived on the street. And I cringe to imagine what that girl has been exposed to in those years that she has basically just lived on the street. What has been her experience? How is it every night when you have to sleep and you don't have a proper shelter over your head? As a young girl growing up, you start your period. You know, there are different things that your dignity is supposed to be protected, but, you know, they're out there with all the elements. How do you protect such a child? And there's so many of them like that there that we are not capturing, that we're not engaging. But, you know, for me, looking at particularly my own constituency and saying, how do we want to address these issues? Like this little girl that I spoke to, you know, she and her mother hitting a rough patch doesn't necessarily mean that her life needs to stop and that she needs to start living rough on the street. We want to create like shelters, places where children who are homeless can pass through, can receive some sort of grooming, education, skills acquisition, even in the time when their parents are trying to get back on their feet. Because we have to be really sensitive. You know that abroad, in different countries, the minute it is obvious you are not able to cater for a child, the state takes over. The state takes over immediately and is responsible for the child's education, the feeding, the welfare. But we just leave them and leave them in the condition. And then we are surprised when these children now become sitting ducks for, you know, extremists and criminal gangs and all of that. We have to start to engage children at the local level to make sure that during school hours, there must be a place where children can come in and receive some form of learning. And the beauty about education now is that it doesn't always have to be about brick and mortar. Technology has made so many ways for us to educate people, even from a smartphone. There are so many programs, international programs, that we can plug into and get children. I mean, if, for example, in Eti-Osa one, in every zone, in every community, there is some sort of shelter that is provided. All these children on the street from 8 o'clock to 1 o'clock, we provide, people volunteer, they come, they learn, they take something away that develops them. Now, we may not be able to solve the entire problem of being able to, you know, provide jobs and do all that, but the little things that we can do will go a long way.
But is advocacy helping in this?
Well, I mean, advocacy is limited. You can shout about a problem, you can sensitize the necessary people. It is important, but it doesn't capture, you know, the entirety of it. There's a time when action and policy making has to come into play. If the State House of Assembly emphasizes that the law that states that children should be in school at a certain time is enforced, you will see a change. You would see a difference if we start to push and put out truant officers and make sure that no parents, no matter what your situation is, should be engaging a child in any form of trade or any form of labor during those school hours. Enforcement is where the rubber meets the road. We can have all the beautiful laws and policies, but if we're not going out there and actively implementing and making sure that this is hitting, you know, where the people are, then we wouldn't. But
again, it's amazing that this is where we are at the moment, and we just might be coming back here in another year and another year, and it becomes a routine. Looking at advocacy and also looking at the seriousness, because you spoke about legislation, which is very key.
Yes.
Isn't it amazing that till this moment, as many as we've seen, this is the political season in Nigeria, a lot of women are out there campaigning for, especially the men folks. This conversation has to be brought to the fore.
Yes.
How can we actually front load this? Because I'm trying to paint a picture of the lady, of the girl child you've always seen in the last 3 years.
Yes.
And you can imagine what she must have gone through.
Yeah.
If anyone sat with her today.
The stories.
The stories,
goodness,
yes. So what should we really do to push to ensure that we have examples from states like Lagos, like other places, Abuja, some key cities in Nigeria, to change the narrative?
We have to think out of the box, first and foremost. You know, primary education is the responsibility of the local government, okay? Now, a lot of people are putting out to the presidential candidates and saying, oh, there are 20 million children out of school, what are we doing about it? Yes, as if you want to be president or if you want to operate at the federal level, you can shape policy, funding and all of that to support. But at the end of the day, it's really the local government's responsibility. We have to start to look at Nigeria's problems at granular levels, Sulaiman. It's no longer, you see, it's when you look at it in this big, massive 774 local governments, how many, you know, it seems insurmountable. But when you break it down, each local government, each constituency, each zone, how can we replicate solutions that we can now make spread across? And these shelters is what I believe can be the solution. We have to incorporate them into our, you know, our public life where, and you know, I have some examples. What I'm talking about already operates on a micro level, especially during the coronavirus pandemic when everything stopped. You know, children were not going to school and everything. It disrupted our idea of education in a lot of ways, even for affluent parents. Your children could not go to school, so you had to take advantage of technology in teaching them, and a lot of parents became personally involved in their children's, you know, education and all of that. So that brought about a shift, which I believe is positive. So we need to do the same for children who are not as privileged and make sure that during the time of the pandemic in Lekki, there were just individuals like you and me who thought, you know what, this is a problem. All these kids, day in, day out, they're not doing anything. They're just begging and looking for food. Why don't we create little shelters where between maybe 10 o'clock and 1 o'clock, they will come. We will give them a plate of food, but we would also teach them.
Wow.
We would also teach them. And that happened. Sometimes you had as much as 50, 100 little kids in a place. All of them come in, they will eat something, but then there would also be screens, and each of them will be able to contribute on those shared knowledge programs on YouTube or one of those. And there were volunteers there who were contributing their time to make sure that every child got some attention.
And you said this happened in Lagos?
This happened in Lagos. And these are just ordinary citizens. So imagine if there was some governmental support to those kind of initiatives where by policy, in communities, leaders are able to create some sort of programs that children who are maybe not able to be incorporated within the school system can learn. What is education? The ability to think, the ability to process information, the ability to propose solutions. That's not rocket science. We can enable children to be able to do that.
It brings us to grassroots governance. If you say we should, go back to where it starts from, where it all begins,
yes.
Which is the grassroots.
The grassroots.
There are people who still don't think that this exists in Nigeria. So how can you have this conversation from amongst the constituents or the grassroots so that they can better understand? If you as an individual, as a citizen, can recognize someone, over the years that you see maybe on your way, commuting.
Just passing, yes.
How difficult can it be for a local council or local development council to have that same understanding, the same rapport with the people? Is there a way this can actually come to light?
Yeah, but you see, the problem is you have to be public spirited to be able to see and identify these kind of challenges. I'm sorry to say, but do we have public spirited people in these offices at this time? Do they really wake up every day and have a burden about the 2 million out of school children in Lagos around the different local governments? Do they have a burden about this? Do they have sleepless nights wondering about how these out of school children are going to be educated? I don't think it's such a priority for them, because if it was a priority, we will be doing something. I believe in starting with the smallest step. What those wonderful citizens were doing during the pandemic in Lekki was a small step, but you would imagine how it would have gone a long way in those children's lives. So if we're being innovative, if we want to really solve a problem, there is always something that we can do. And government may not be able to do everything. Sometimes you need private sector participation. You need collaboration with civil society, with development agencies, with NGOs. So we need to start to incorporate partners, bring partnerships together to achieve public service. So for this education, education thing and children that are not going to school, if we really want to solve the problem, there are so many ways that we can address it. But it will require all of us coming together, putting our heads together and saying, you know what, at a granular level, on a very small scale, how can we start to implement these solutions and then amplify it throughout all of our local governments, all of our communities? Because you know what, every day that passes that those children are not in school, every moment, every year that passes that those children are not in school, we are breeding people who will be later problems to our collective,
Tari, you're not far from that, because I recall we had this conversation last year, and here we are again. Speeches are being made on a day like this. The conversation, people spend money, school children converged, discussions, and perhaps maybe the United Nations will have that across different African cities. But it ends there. So, and we'll wait for another, October 11 to come back to the same conversation.
And the same problems.
And the same problems.
Yeah, bringing them up.
I like to look at, solving the problem, at least activating a solution. And one of it is grassroots. And I want to run away from that, because I still want to stay on that. Because if you can identify, if you have people who have the public, you say they are public spirited individuals,
yes,
coming together to help a cause. How can we as a people in communities help these ones that we have so identified? Because they seem to be the torch bearers.
Yes.
The need to lead so that everyone can understand the fight that they have taken on.
But, you know, in all of this, we shouldn't, how do we put it? We shouldn't absolve government of their responsibility. Government has its responsibility. It has failed to some degree for it to have gotten this bad, which is why we will now say, as private citizens, as NGOs, as, you know, development institutions, we will support government. But the place of government still stands. They must do their responsibility, and we must hold government accountable, okay? Now, as private citizens, we need to embrace a culture of volunteerism. A culture of saying, I will do it. I would be the solution. There are out-of-school children in my community. I would provide something for them to do. Selflessly. You don't have to get anything back. You don't need to have the recognition. Okay, if you want the recognition, get it. But do something. Put money down and say, okay, if there are 100 children out of school in my community, let me create a small lesson where they can come to every day. Employ teachers or get your friends who will be volunteering, and you will have a rotation and a schedule, different people coming together to teach different subjects. As Nigerians, we have to start to take responsibility for our nation and our nation's future and our people. It's not, yes, it's the government's responsibility, and as much as we must hold them accountable, we have to also do our part. And doing our part is recognizing the challenges, actually thinking as a solution provider, what can I do? Sometimes it may just be about bringing 10 of your friends together. You put money down and say, you know what, let us hire 1 or 2 teachers that will be taking care of all these kids in this place. And you'll be surprised how you've changed a life and how you've changed a series of lives. We must all start to think like that. It's called nation building. It's not one person's responsibility, it's a collective responsibility.
You know, there's also the fight against people who have taken these children, you know, more like plucking them off our society, using them, you know, as child laborers,
yes.
Prostitutes and political thugs. So how can the society, how can the people identify these or help to identify these people? Because first you need to first identify them before you can actually also start talking to the people in such communities, to letting them understand that, look, this man or woman is not a helper.
Yeah. And, you know, that's where orientation comes in. You see, poverty is such a horrible thing because it puts you out of so many equations. I mean, simple knowledge of certain things. Poverty puts you in a position where you don't even have access to that knowledge. Certain parents who are living on the streets with their children or who are in such desperate conditions, there are certain things that they will unknowingly or knowingly expose their children to that would have, you know, horrible consequences in that child's lives. So part of the advocacy that you're talking about will also mean orientation for people in the grassroots. You know, someone told me an interesting story the other day. They said that there was a child in a school who went into a toilet and he saw a man in the toilet, and he was so scared he ran out and went to the principal's office, literally terrified, and went to report. So they investigated and found out that it was a security guard in the school who had been pressed and just went into the toilet to ease himself. So when they asked the child that, why did you run like that? Why were you so afraid? They said, because my mom told me that if I ever enter a toilet and there is a man or somebody just there like that, I should find somebody to report. This is a child of like 3 years old that had just been given that information. But imagine that child was not educated in that way and there was actually danger lurking. That child would have been a victim. So imagine that we start to teach children, not just our children, but vulnerable children, start to tell them how to look out for traffickers, how to look out for people that want to come and abduct them and use them for prostitution. Even if you tell somebody that is living on the streets that they are going to come and take her children away and send them to another country as slaves, that person will be afraid and will want to do something about it. So we need to have to find ways to start to educate people, provide that orientation, so that the fact that they are vulnerable should not, condemn their lives to all sorts of, hazards that we wouldn't want our own families to go through.
Okay, Tari, we'll take a moment. When we come back, we'll speak more to your, aspiration as a candidate vying for the assembly. If you've thought of legislation to helping the girl child, and what more you think you can do for the community, because you've always been a part of the community. And that's when we return. Stay with us here on VSA. Well, if you just joined us, you're welcome. You're watching Villa Square Africa here on News Center Television. And of course, we're looking at two key issues. First, it was the mental health awareness, which was just October 10. And of course, today, October 11, we're looking at the Day of the African Girl Child. But let me quickly now welcome Professor Sulaiman Teferra, who's joining me live from Ethiopia. Good to see you, Professor Teferra. I recall we had this conversation a year ago talking about mental health. Here we are at the moment, still back to the issue. Has anything changed, Professor Teferra? Many times people deal with mental health problems and they don't know. And I recall over a year ago you helped make sense of what many are going through on the continent. Professor Teferra.
Thank you very much, Sulaiman. Good to see you again. It's been a year.
Absolutely. It's a year. Good to see you too.
Yeah, it's a privilege and an honor for me to be back at VSA and to come back to your question. I think the major change that we see is issue of COVID-19, which seems to have subsided now. That's really a great news, because COVID-19 has contributed a lot to the adverse mental health experience in the world and including Africa. So I would say the control of COVID-19 has contributed a lot in reducing, the burden of mental health issues in the past 1 year. So that's my observation. Otherwise, in terms of health services for people with mental illnesses and other, issues related with mental health, I do not think there was a major change in the past 1 year, because still, the economic situation of Africa is not good, as you know. COVID-19 has affected the economy, as well as the war in Ukraine has affected the economy in Africa. So we have a lot of, inflation and huge economic problems in Africa. So economic problems and deprivations contribute a lot to mental health problems. So one of the main reasons for the prevalence of mental health problems in Africa is poverty. So I have a feeling poverty has gotten worse with COVID-19 and the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. So it's not really that encouraging.
I know we spoke about culture, we spoke about beliefs, the last time, but again, there's something you mentioned which has to do with economy, and let's break it down to ordinary language, hard times. How does that affect, individuals' mental health? Because in Nigeria and other African countries, we've seen people, driven to the extreme, and we hear, phrases and words like "I'm depressed," "I'm losing it," "I'm done with this." So how can people, Professor Teferra, how can we recognize those who are in dire need of experts like yourself to see before they go off the cliff?
Yeah, it's an unfortunate situation because the proportion of psychiatrists to population is more than 1 per million. So that means there is less than 1 psychiatrist for 1 million people in Africa, including Nigeria and Ethiopia, the 2 largest countries in Africa. As you know, Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa, and Ethiopia is the second, with a population of 120 million people. So we have 120 psychiatrists for a population of 120 million people. So that means there is only 1 psychiatrist for 1 million people. In fact, this is not even real, because most of the psychiatrists are concentrated in the capital city and in urban areas. So the majority of Africans living in rural areas have no access to mental health services. It's unfortunate. And if I come back to the World Mental Health Day's motto this year, it says, making mental health and well-being for all a global priority. That's the motto. That means the aspiration is, or the wish is, that mental health services will be accessible to everyone. But in Africa, that's really far-fetched possibility, because, as I said earlier, the majority of Africans, I would say more than 90%, have no access to modern mental health services. So it's up to the governments to prioritize mental health and then make it accessible.
In prioritizing that, Professor Teferra, and off the top of my head, I'm trying to think of what your country and my country is going through, to the extent that these experts that are not enough have started migrating, leaving these 2 countries and even the continent. What can leaders do? Now, it looks like a political question, but we need to ask this. What can be done to ensuring that these experts stay to help fix an already dire situation?
Yeah, I think it's brain drain is a huge issue in Africa. And Nigeria is one of the countries most affected, and Ethiopia is no exception. We lose, our brightest minds in mass. So that means there is no, conducive environment for these able professionals to stay and work in Africa and help their fellow citizens. So the responsibility rests on the policymakers and the governments to make this, it's not only money, of course, the consultant in Africa makes less than a cleaner in the US or UK. So a professor's salary is less than a cleaner's salary in the UK or the US. That means we live on very little salary, but beyond salary, it's the environment. Every professional has a profound desire to help his or her country. But when the environment is not conducive, and then when there are lots of push factors, people migrate, and because the pull factors are also there. There are Africans, get education. They get their medical degrees, with money covered from poor farmers. And these qualified professionals go straight into practice when they go to Europe or North America. So literally these countries are, reaping what the poor Africans have invested on. So I think, the governments have to wake up, because they are losing not only the professionals, but the little resource poor farmers put into the government's coffer, which is spent on educating these bright, able professionals. So it's really a time for reckoning, I would say.
Well, in the face of what we're dealing, apologies for butting in there, Professor Teferra. I know you're a busy man, but before I let you go, in the face of what we're dealing, Professor Teferra, what are those, things you would want to see Africans do to minimize the problem, especially getting anyone into a fix that he or she will be needing to see a psychiatrist? Now, we're talking about prevention. Take us through quickly lifestyles that can help us stay off the track.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, mental health is something that we can create, and prevention is a possibility. Although there are some individuals who have strong genetic vulnerability, and they may develop mental illness irrespective of their lifestyles. But the majority of mental disorders can be prevented if people follow healthy lifestyles, including managing stress, simple things like physical exercise, having adequate sleep, and a healthy interpersonal relationship if they maintain their friendship, their connections, and using whatever available resources in the community when they face challenges. So there is ample opportunity for prevention of mental disorders, but unfortunately, we rely on highly qualified professionals. But basic mental health services can be integrated into the primary health care by providing training to general health care professionals who work in the primary health care setting, and they can provide also basic counseling and basic mental health intervention in the community as well. So it does not necessarily need highly specialized professionals, because, as you know, Africa has a population of more than 1 billion people, but the number of psychiatrists in Africa is just 1,000 for a population of 1 billion. United States has a population of a third of Africa, but they have more than 50,000 psychiatrists. And they talk about lack of psychiatrists. So we cannot have enough psychiatrists in Africa. It's not possible. So we have to come up with innovative approaches like training generalists and primary health care workers to be able to make a diagnosis and provide basic counseling and other interventions. So that's the only way out that I can see. Otherwise, just the number of psychiatrists is highly unlikely to meet the demand of the African population as we stand now.
Well, I'm used to saying it's a good place for us to leave it, but it looks like a sad commentary. And I'd like to thank you for your time, Professor Sulaiman Teferra, Chairman, the Department of Psychiatry at Addis Ababa University in Ethiopia, and the Executive Committee member, African Association of Psychiatrists, and Honorary member of World Psychiatric Association. Africa needs you, Professor Teferra, and we'll say, please stay safe.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be on your station, and I hope to contribute more in the future as well. Thank you, and have a great time.
Yeah, you have a blessed evening. Bye-bye. Well, Professor Teferra there speaking with us. He's always been with us year in, year out to talk. You see some of the key issues. I can see it got to you as well. It did same to me, and we haven't actually scratched the surface. politically speaking, the African leaders don't see the need for some of these key things, and it is also tied to governance. People losing it is also tied to how comfortable they've become. So I was going to ask you if you started looking at legislation to help in the girl child, but again, I also want us to tie to lifestyles. Things can be really tough and hard for people. In the Lekki area, I'm happy you're here now. Let me put a smile on your face. But again, it's a sad commentary. People live in Lekki, highbrow Lekki for those non-Nigerians. But potable water is not in Lekki.
Yeah. And we're surrounded by water. So it's such an irony, but those are the challenges that we face. You see, something that has taken a beating and just deteriorated over the years is our quality of life. You just painted the picture. Lekki is one of the affluent, highbrow areas. The rents or the cost of properties in Lekki are astronomical. But the basic things, clean water, clean streets, you know, just the things that just make you feel a sense of well-being. And it's interesting when Professor was talking, he was talking about economic hardships as leading to unstable mental health. But also, how about, I mean, think about it, Sulaiman. Look at our environment. Look at the quality of environment that we live in. How can we, look at you and I, so educated, we're exposed in many different ways, and there are tons of people like that all around Lagos, for example. But look at the quality of environment we are comfortable in, that we carry out all of our daily activities in. Doesn't that show that there is something broken even in us as a people? Yes, for us to be able to adapt and just be comfortable in such a space. We have not thought it necessary to take a moment, stand still, and fix these issues. I went for a policy session on water, you know, water governance and all of that. And this water thing they're talking about, it is an endemic public institution failure, because there is a water corporation, there are agencies, departments of government that are responsible for this. And you were talking about legislation. I think that before we even start to design new legislation, to what degree are the departments and agencies of government implementing the existing ones? That's the problem all the way.
Implementation is absent.
Zero implementation. Many times budgets are allocated, you know, things that the process of government is appearing to be functional. But to what degree are those benefits trickling down into our everyday lives? That is the failure of implementation. So I'm not looking to go into the House of Assembly and immediately let's just start to create new laws. No. What are we doing with the existing laws? And Lagos State has some very fine laws and policies. Lagos State has no shortage of government agencies and departments supposed to implement these laws. The problem starts when they are not doing what they are supposed to do. And I know this for a fact. You know, I'm passionate about the environment, and a lot of my work that I do is within the environment space. In my constituency, realizing the failure of why is our environment so dirty, what are the problems? I'm part of the environment committee with, you know, Lera, and we analyze this. And one of the key things that we have done... You have to
break that down for non-Lagosians.
Lekki Estate Residents Association. So we have an environment committee, which I'm, you know, part of. And one of the things that we did is that we looked at all the environment stakeholders within our environment, which is the government agencies. So we have LOMA. LOMA is the Lagos State Waste Collection Agency. We have the local government, who statutorily by the Constitution is responsible for the immediate environment at the grassroots level. We have the Ministry of Environment, and then we have the PSPs, that's the private sector, you know, waste collectors. So what I have done is that I have brought all of these stakeholders on one forum where in real time we address, you know, this public service delivery to make sure that each and every one of them is doing what they're supposed to do, which also translates to the oversight function of the Legislative House, which I'm looking to get into. I believe that if we as legislators start to carry out that function to the letter, make sure that each agency and each department is doing their job, you will see a transformational result. People are just not doing what they're supposed to do. That is the majority of the problem. We're talking about girl child and children out of school. Trust me, there's an agency that is responsible for that, and they're receiving budget allocation. We're talking about, you know, people, water, there are these water corporations, you're talking about environment. There is an agency that is receiving allocation to do something, but who is monitoring them to make sure that they are doing their job to the letter? Who is fighting for the people of Lagos to ensure that the public service agencies that are supposed to be serving us are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing? So the State House of Assembly is responsible for providing that oversight function to make sure that every department, every agency of government, every money allocated for is doing what it has been designed to do. So that is what we need to do.
Are there other women, you know, especially younger ladies, you know, towing the line, you know, or your path? Because on a day like this, we also should be concerned that we're not seeing too many women, you know, in advocacy, in politics, even though the country speaks of having some affirmative action, talking about percentage. So do you have many who are under your wings by way of mentoring?
I mean, there are a lot of people who, you know, get in touch with me and say, we like what you're doing, we want to participate, but a lot of them are doing so maybe in volunteering capacity, or they are working with organizations where they feel, okay, this is a way we can assist, so they're doing things through their church or through their mosque or through their community and all of that. But you still have fewer people coming into actually this politics and governance space because the barriers for entry are still a bit high. The barriers for participation in our political space are still a bit high. A lot of people feel that they don't have what it takes, either because of a false perception. They feel that they don't have what it takes to come and participate. So many times, the question that I get asked is, how were you able to get in? How were you able to put yourself forward? What is their experience in your party? You know, many people don't know. So I tend to share my story a lot to say that. And I think I was fortunate because I'm not with any of the legacy parties in that sense. I'm with a smaller party and a party that we are growing. So, for example, for me to buy my form to contest for the House of Assembly, I felt it was reasonable. You know, it was 1 million naira for Lagos State House of Assembly, but because I'm female, I paid half price, you know, for that. So there was that concession that was given for that. So I think that with more inclusion of different political parties and different political interests in that space, there will be more opening for young females. Like, I mean, I look at 2025, the local government elections in Lagos will happen again in 2025, you know. I look at a situation where we have young girls of 25 and young boys vying for chairmanship, local government chairman, councillorship. That is what I want to happen. That's what I want to see.
Before I leave you, I'd like to ask you, are you looking to have a debate with other candidates? You know, people have said, let's start a debating culture in politics.
I'm open. I'm happy to, but with my opponents, I don't know if my opponents will be.
Well, anyway, the last man who didn't come for a presidential debate wasn't that successful, and that's in Kenya.
Oh, really?
Yes, Raila Odinga.
Okay.
He didn't go for the debate.
He didn't go.
William Ruto went for
But
the debate, and
that,
he's president
yeah,
today.
but people say that it's
So
just the elite that listen to debates.
Well, perhaps, but it looks like it's changing on the continent.
Okay.
Oh, Tari Taylor, I'd like to thank you for your time.
Thank you, as always.
Well, it is a wrap on the show. Many thanks for being such a nice company. And of course, we'd like to also say thanks for watching. And we'll be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.